So I've taken some time to do some work offline and to refine my lighting, my environment to complete the planets, and so I have a presentation here that all the planets are orbiting. They're lit pretty well. I introduced some cameras into the equation, and basically what I'm doing by introducing the camera is I'm composing a shot that I want, maybe at a point in time that I want, and I'm going and introducing either a camera or a target camera. Now, when I introduce that camera, it's borrowing the exact same perspective that I'm in, and so now I have a camera that I can play around with. And just a reminder, if I go to the Object Manager and I click on these little brackets on the camera, it will activate that camera view, so I can change to all the different cameras that I have. And I have different cameras, some just for testing renders, some for very specific compositions that I want to capture, and I'll name those cameras according to the composition or the view or the activity that I want to capture. But my goal here is, again, I have things that are basically staged that I want. The animation is just the solar system orbiting. But the next thing that I want to focus on is I want to create an asteroid belt. Okay, and the idea here is that I want stuff in my solar system that I can fly through, that looks kind of like debris or comets or little chunks of rocks and asteroid stuff. And rather than creating 100 or 200 different pieces of geometry and trying to figure out placing them individually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to rewind my playhead, and I'm going to zoom way out, and I'm going to select Mars. Where's Mars? Mars. There's Mars. I'm going to select the actual planet. And if I look at this whole scene, if I just kind of hit play and I see my animation, this is about the pace of my animation. I'm going to rewind that just in between Mars and Jupiter. If I go out and reference the NASA Solar System Guide, I see that there's an asteroid belt in between Mars and Jupiter. And that's something that I want to emulate. I think it's a pretty interesting thing, and again, it could give me something kind of cool to fly through with a camera a little bit later on in my presentation. And so I want to build this asteroid field, but I don't want to spend the rest of my day working on that. And so I think with just leveraging some tools inside Cinema 4D, I think I can get at this pretty quickly. Now, I'm going to create a new document, and we're probably all aware at this point that we can create an object, we can go to Functions, Duplicate, and we can make a number of copies based on a circular pattern or along a spline, and we can probably say, oh yeah, I can see how I can create these objects, distribute them in a circular shape, and drop an asteroid into this duplication instead, and have that generate the thing that I want. And that's a great strategy. In fact, that's probably the way that I'd get started doing this. However, let me show you an alternative strategy that will give you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to animation, and plus it'll introduce a new concept. I want to talk a little bit about the Mograph module. Now, Mograph, I'm just going to generate a cube here. We're going to take a deeper dive into Mograph in a few projects, but I just wanted to kind of plant the seed. At the top of your Cinema 4D menu bar, you should have a Mograph pull-down menu. Now, if you don't have Mograph, chances are you don't have the studio version. So you're going to need to download the demo if you want to experiment with this. Again, this is not a requirement for the project, but I did want to kind of introduce some of these concepts to you. Mograph is a really powerful motion graphics tool that's built inside Cinema 4D, and what it can do is it can modify content over time based on all kinds of interesting parameters. And what you can do is, I'm just going to go to Mograph, and the basic concept of Mograph is that typically you're going to use what's called a cloner object. Okay, so I have a cloner object, a Mograph cloner object, and I have a cube element. And if I take this cube and I drop it inside the cloner object, you'll see that it gets cloned. Now, if I select the cloner object, I have all these parameters that I can modify my cloner object with, and there's a lot of things that we can do. It's very similar to duplicate in some ways, I can play with all these different values, and I can redistribute how these objects are being distributed. I can adjust the count, and I can really kind of play with these different values and do different things, redistribute them based on scale and based on rotation. The really nice thing about Mograph is that if you look inside the Attributes Manager, you'll notice that there's a little bullet, or the ability to keyframe all of this content over time. That in itself is a very powerful thing. I really just kind of want to focus on the ability to build this asteroid belt that I was talking about before. And the way that I'm going to do that is, rather than clone these things in linear fashion, I could do radial. And let's see if I just set that radius. Okay, now it's the plane that it's on is, we don't want XY, we don't want ZY, we want XZ. Okay, and we could increase our count. Okay, so there's really quickly we can get some content generated. We can bump up our radius. Now whatever we put inside this cloner object, I'll take another sphere, I can put multiple objects in there, will be cloned along that that shape. Okay, I could do that based on whatever parameters are inside the cloner object. So I can do object, linear, radial, or grid array. If I did a grid array, you'll see what that looks like. Let me adjust this size here so we can see what's going on. Let's make this 2000 by 2000 by 2000. Okay. Now we have a grid array, and whatever content we throw on that cloner object, that'll just be added to the equation. Now the real power of Mograph comes not just from what we can put in the cloner object and what we can do with the attributes, but the fact that if we have the cloner object selected, we can go to the Mograph pull-down menu and we can apply what's called effectors to our Mograph cloner. And I'm going to start off with just a really simple effector. And by the way, the key here is that the cloner object has to be selected. Okay, there's a way to do it if you don't have it selected, but generally what you do with Mograph to get started is you start with a cloner object, you drop whatever you want to clone in there, you choose the mode at which it's being cloned, then you select the cloner and you attach an effector. Okay, and by default, if you select the object and then go to Mograph menu and go to effectors, you can now drop some kind of effector on it. And I'll just choose the random effector. Now, because I had the cloner object selected, there's no visual correlation, but because we had the cloner object selected, it automatically in the effector tab applied that random effector as an effector. And if we go into random, what we can do is we could just say, okay, I want this to randomly affect the position. Okay, and so we can, we can say I want to redistribute that randomly along the y-axis. I want to redistribute that content randomly along, whatever axis. We can scale things randomly. So I can say, well, I want to increase the scale, let's say, plus or minus 5. Okay, and you'll see that that's randomly applied. Not everything is scaling according to the same direction. Okay, so that's, just some randomness has been applied to that. We can rotate things randomly, and I'll rotate 40 degrees randomly. So it's basically taking the maximum value of 45 and randomly generating a number of rotation. Okay, now all that stuff is being randomly rotated, scaled, and positioned in space, and so we can very quickly, build this stuff. Now, the cool thing again is we can go back into the cloner object, and we can, we can modify this stuff over time. So we can say, well, let's reduce the count or increase the count over time, and have that content generate. We can change the size of this over time. There's a whole host of things that we can do. We can also adjust the random effector over time, and play with all of these different values. There's tons of stuff that we can do here, but what I want to do again is I quickly want to build a comet. Okay, so let me delete all of this stuff. Using these basic strategies, I'm going to pretend that this sphere is my comet. Okay, and remember, I want to build, or excuse me, an asteroid. I want to build an asteroid belt here, and I think I'm no scientist, but I think the difference between an asteroid and a comet, well, an asteroid has to be in the asteroid belt, otherwise it's not an asteroid. Let me go to Mograph. I'm going to go to my cloner object. I'm going to drop my sphere, into my cloner object, and with that cloner selected, I'm going to change the mode to radial. I'm going to change the axis to XZ. I'm going to increase that radius. I'll change that to 2,000. I'm going to increase the count. Eventually I'm going to do this actually inside my solar system. Maybe I'll change this to 50. Now, that in itself isn't, very interesting, and I think that the sphere is too big. Let me take this down to, say, like 20 for the sake of this demonstration. Okay, doesn't look like a very compelling asteroid belt, but if I threw a material on this sphere, and if I bump that count up to, say, 300, okay, and then with that cloner object selected, and I go to Mograph, Effector, and I'm going to add a random effector. Look at that. That's getting a lot closer to where I want to be with my asteroid belt. So I'm going to go to my random effector. It's transforming randomly along the X, Y, and Z. I'm going to scale this also, let's say by 0.1, according to all axes. Okay, or let's say 1. Nope, didn't want to do that. Uniform scale. Absolute scale. Uniform scale, let's say 0.5. There we go. That's what I was looking for. I'm looking for something that kind of generates random sizes. So I'll reduce the variation to 0.2, looks like. Okay, now I got some different sized asteroids here. And so I could use this example right now. In fact, I can take all this stuff. I'll group it together, and I'll call this asteroid belt. I'm going to copy my asteroid belt. I'm going to go back to my solar system and I'm going to paste it. Okay. I'm in the wrong version here. Let me go back down and look for solar system 05. That's the version I was looking for. I'll paste. And again, my asteroid belt is a little too small right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, dig into my asteroid belt. I'm going to go into my cloner object. That's where I determine how big the radius of my clone is. And so I'll just bump this up to, say, 5,000 centimeters. Need to go a little bit bigger. I'll try 6,000 centimeters. That was a little too big, so let me do 5,500. That's just about perfect. Okay, I'll bump up the count because as I redistributed those, change those to 500. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to make these more random. I'm going to send these randomly instead of just 50 centimeters. I think I'm going to send these to like 150 centimeters. Okay, that'll kind of redistribute all of those. Now let me give that a quick render. I'm going to pause this and let this render, and I'll jump back in when it's done rendering. Okay, so there's my render. Now everything, everything rendered the way that I wanted it to, and I think that this is going to give me something interesting to fly through. And in fact, if I just, I'll zoom way in here, and again, I'll want to make some different decisions about what these are actually going to look like. I'm not going to leave them as spheres, but if I just kind of look in here, give that a render. Let's see what this is going to look like. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. That's kind of what I was going for. Now again, I'm going to want to resize these things and change their scale, apply a texture to them. But I think this is gonna work out the way that I want it. Just for kicks, I'm going to introduce a camera. That camera just borrowed the same exact coordinates that I'm looking through. I'm going to select that camera, and I'll jump in, and I'll really quickly turn depth of field on and off. Let me find my camera now. I'm a little confused as to what... Okay, that looks pretty good. I see what I'm looking at now. I have a plane of focus. I've turned on my depth of field, front blur, and back blur. I'm going to jump into my render settings and make sure that depth of field is turned on. And once I do that, when I look through this camera and give that a render, I'll pause this and turn it back on when it's done rendering. Okay, my render's done, and I have some background blurring and some foreground blurring, and so that was the effect that I wanted to accomplish with the camera, and that looks pretty cool. I'm going to leave my camera for a minute here. So now I have all the basic elements that I wanted to animate. I have it lit more or less the way that I want it lit. I'm just going to advance the playhead here just a little bit. Maybe I'll animate my asteroid belt too so that it rotates in time. But for the most part, I have everything, all the basic nuts and bolts of this animation in place. I got some cameras in the equation that I'll start to, cause those to move around the solar system. And my goal is to present my solar system animation in the most effective way possible. So I might have a couple of different renders. I might have some close-up renders, some real close flybys of the planets. You can submit multiple renders or one continuous render. I'm going to leave this up to you on how you want to present your solar system, but the goal is to present this in the most effective way possible. Okay, I'll post a few other additional links inside the lessons folder, but the goal is to spend the next week working on this project, texture it, light it, animate it, and present it in the best way possible. And so, as is always the case, if you have any questions, post in the discussion board. I'll stay tuned in, and I look forward to seeing your works in progress posted in the discussion board. And just make sure that you get the project in prior to the due date. Contact me if you have any questions, and have fun with this one.